The morning air was crisp and cold as hundreds of people began gathering along the narrow streets of Llanfairpwll, a small Welsh town that rarely saw such excitement. Word had spread quickly through the community that Prince William and Kate, the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, would be visiting their town today. For most residents, this would be the first time they had ever seen real royalty in person. Mrs. Eleanor Davies had been awake since 4 in the morning, preparing sandwiches and thermos flasks of hot tea for her family. At 78 years old, she had lived through many royal occasions on television, but never had the chance to see any member of the royal family face to face. Her granddaughter Sarah helped her choose the perfect spot along the main street, bringing folding chairs and warm blankets to make the long wait more comfortable. The local shops had transformed overnight. Williams the baker had created special royal cupcakes with tiny British flags on top. The flower shop owner, Mrs. Patel, had arranged beautiful bouquets, hoping to present them to Kate. Even the usually grumpy Mr. Jones, who ran the hardware store, had hung bunting across his shop front and polished its windows until they sparkled in the morning sun. Children from the local primary school arrived in their best uniforms, clutching handmade welcome signs with glitter and colorful drawings. 7-year-old Tommy Evans had spent hours the night before drawing a picture of the royal family, including their 3 children. His teacher, Miss Roberts, helped organize the children into neat lines, reminding them about proper behavior when meeting important visitors. The excitement was infectious. Neighbors who rarely spoke to each other found themselves chatting and sharing stories about previous royal visits to Wales. Some elderly residents remembered when Queen Elizabeth herself had visited decades ago. They shared memories of that special day, describing how the whole town had felt magical and important. Camera crews and journalists began setting up their equipment early, creating a professional atmosphere that made the event feel even more significant. The BBC Wales team had arrived with large cameras and sound equipment, preparing to broadcast the royal visit live to the rest of the country. Local newspaper photographers positioned themselves at strategic points, hoping to capture the perfect shot of the royal couple interacting with the townspeople. Security personnel arrived in unmarked cars, conducting careful sweeps of the area. Police officers in high-visibility jackets directed traffic and helped organize the growing crowd. Despite the serious security measures, the atmosphere remained festive and welcoming. The security team seemed relaxed, smiling and joking with locals as they went about their preparations. The town council had worked tirelessly to ensure everything was perfect. The streets had been cleaned until they gleamed. Flower boxes had been filled with fresh autumn blooms, and even the old war memorial had been polished and decorated with fresh wreaths. Mayor Jenkins, a portly man with a kind face, rehearsed his welcome speech for the 100th time, checking his notes and adjusting his best suit. As the morning progressed, more and more people arrived from neighboring villages and towns. Some had traveled for hours just to be part of this historic moment. Car parks filled up quickly, and people began walking considerable distances just to reach the town center. Local teenagers had set up a small drink stand, selling hot chocolate and coffee to help keep the waiting crowds warm. The community center, where the main ceremony would take place, buzzed with activity. Volunteers arranged chairs in perfect rows, polished the floors until they shone, and carefully positioned the memorial plaque that would be unveiled during the visit. Fresh flowers adorned every table. The walls displayed photographs showcasing the town's proud history and community achievements. Local veterans, dressed in their finest uniforms with medals gleaming on their chests, took places of honor near the front of the gathering area. These brave men and women had served their country with distinction, and today they would have the privilege of meeting their future king and queen. Some leaned heavily on walking sticks, others sat in wheelchairs, but all held their heads high. With unmistakable pride and dignity, the school choir had been practicing for weeks, preparing special songs to perform for the royal visitors. Their young voices had echoed through the community center during countless rehearsals, and today they would sing for Prince William and Kate. The children wore their best clothes, their faces scrubbed clean and hair neatly combed, excitement practically radiating from their small bodies. Television crews conducted interviews with excited locals, Capturing the genuine enthusiasm and warmth of the community, Mrs. Davies spoke about how honored she felt that royalty would visit their small town. Tommy Evans showed his drawing to the camera, explaining each family member he had carefully drawn. The baker described his special royal cupcakes. The florist talked about the bouquets she hoped to present to Kate. The sense of anticipation grew stronger as 11 o'clock approached. People checked their watches constantly, craned there, next to look down the street for any sign of the royal convoy. Children bounced on their toes with excitement, while adults tried to maintain dignified composure despite their obvious enthusiasm. Police motorcycles appeared first, purring as they took positions along the route. This was the signal everyone had been waiting for. The royal convoy would arrive any moment. Parents lifted small children onto their shoulders for better views. Cameras were raised and ready, and a collective hush fell over the crowd despite their excitement. The atmosphere was electric with the kind of joy and anticipation that transforms ordinary moments into extraordinary memories. This small Welsh town, usually quiet and peaceful, had become the center of attention for the entire country. Local people who had lived ordinary lives were about to become part of royal history, witnesses to a moment they would treasure and share for the rest of their lives. Everything was perfectly prepared. The crowd was positioned and ready, and the royal couple was about to arrive. What should have been a celebration of community spirit and royal tradition was about to take an unexpected turn that would transform this joyous occasion into something much more profound and deeply moving than anyone could have imagined. The distant sound of motorcycle engines grew louder as the royal convoy approached the town center. Hearts began beating faster throughout the crowd as people realized the moment they had been waiting for was finally arriving. Children pressed forward against the safety barriers while their parents held them securely. Everyone trying to get the best possible view of the approaching vehicles. The first motorcycle appeared around the corner, followed by several police cars with their lights flashing in a carefully coordinated procession. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, waving their British flags enthusiastically. Camera phones were raised high above heads as everyone tried to capture this historic moment for their personal memories and social media accounts. Then came the moment everyone had been anticipating. The sleek black Range Rover with tinted windows rolled slowly around the corner, moving at a dignified pace that allowed the waiting crowd to savor every second of its approach. The vehicle looked impressive and official, its polished surface reflecting the autumn sunlight as it made its way toward the designated stopping point in front of the community center. Mrs. Davies clutched her granddaughter's hand tightly, tears of excitement already forming in her eyes. She had lived through so many years without ever expecting to witness such a moment in her small town. Tommy Evans bounced excitedly in his father's arms. His homemade drawing crumpled in his small fist as he waved frantically at the approaching car. The Range Rover came to a smooth stop exactly where the red carpet had been laid out by the organizing committee. For a brief moment, everything seemed frozen in time. The crowd held its collective breath, cameras focused and ready. As everyone waited for the car doors to open and reveal the royal couple they had traveled so far to see, security personnel took their final positions, their trained eyes scanning the crowd one last time before giving the all-clear signal. The driver remained seated, while a protection officer stepped forward to open the passenger door. This was the moment that would be remembered and talked about in the town for generations to come. Prince William emerged first from the vehicle, and immediately something seemed different from what everyone expected. Those closest to the car noticed that his usual confident stride appeared hesitant, almost uncertain. His famous smile, which had charmed millions around the world, seemed forced and strained around the edges, instead of the relaxed, approachable demeanor he was known for. There was a tension in his shoulders that even casual observers could detect. The crowd continued cheering and waving, but some of the more observant spectators began to sense that something was not quite right. William's usual habit of making immediate eye contact with the crowd and offering genuine waves seemed absent. Instead, he appeared to be looking through the people rather than at them, as if his mind was somewhere else entirely. Kate stepped out of the vehicle next, and the contrast with her usual public appearances was even more striking. Known for her grace under pressure and her natural ability to connect with people, she seemed almost fragile today. Her elegant navy coat was impeccable as always, and her hair was perfectly styled, but there was something in her posture that suggested vulnerability rather than royal confidence. Her hands, usually steady and graceful as she waved to crowds, were visibly trembling as she smoothed down her coat and touched her hair nervously. Those familiar with her public appearances over the years could see that this was not the composed, radiant duchess they had come to admire. Her breathing appeared shallow and controlled, as if she was concentrating hard on maintaining her composure. Couples stood together beside their vehicle for a moment, and the crowd's cheering reached its peak. British flags waved enthusiastically, children called out greetings, and cameras clicked constantly as everyone tried to capture the perfect photograph. But William and Kate seemed almost disconnected from the celebration happening around them, as if they were present physically but mentally somewhere else entirely. William reached for Kate's hand, a gesture that might have seemed romantic to casual observers but appeared more like a husband offering support to his wife during a difficult moment. The brief squeeze he gave her fingers was gentle but urgent, the kind of touch that communicates understanding and shared strength in the face of adversity. Mayor Jenkins stepped forward with his practiced welcome speech ready, his face beaming with pride and excitement. He had rehearsed this moment countless times, preparing jokes and local references that he hoped would make the royal couple smile and feel welcomed by their community. But as he approached them, he, too, began to notice that something seemed unusual about their demeanor today. The mayor's welcoming words were warm and genuine, expressing the community's honor at hosting such distinguished visitors. He spoke about the town's history, its proud traditions, and how much this royal visit meant to everyone who had gathered to witness it. But as he spoke, he could see that William and Kate were struggling to maintain their usual engaged expressions. Kate's eyes began to glisten with unshed tears, though she fought valiantly to keep them from falling. Her training in royal protocol and years of public appearances had taught her to maintain composure under any circumstances. But today that training was being tested in ways she had never experienced before. The local children's choir began singing their carefully rehearsed welcome song, their young voices pure and sweet in the crisp autumn air. Under normal circumstances, this would have been exactly the kind of moment that Kate especially loved, often kneeling down to chat with children and asking about their schools and interests. Today, however, the innocent joy in their voices seemed to make her emotional state even more fragile. William acknowledged the singing children with a nod and what he hoped passed for a smile. But those who knew him well could see the effort it required. His jaw was clenched tightly, and there was a distant look in his eyes that suggested his thoughts were far from the ceremony taking place around him. The crowd remained enthusiastic and welcoming, unaware that they were witnessing to people struggling with something far more serious than the usual pressures of royal duty. The flags continued waving, the cameras kept clicking, and the atmosphere remained festive. But the careful observer could sense that this royal visit was about to become something entirely different from what anyone had expected. The distant sound of motorcycle engines grew louder as the royal convoy approached the town center. Hearts began beating faster throughout the crowd as people realized the moment they had been waiting for was finally arriving. Children pressed forward against the safety barriers while their parents held them securely, everyone trying to get the best possible view of the approaching vehicles. The first motorcycle appeared around the corner, followed by several police cars with their lights flashing in a carefully coordinated procession. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, waving their British flags enthusiastically. Camera phones were raised high above heads as everyone tried to capture this historic moment for their personal memories and social media accounts. Then came the moment everyone had been anticipating. A sleek black Range Rover with tinted windows rolled slowly around the corner, moving at a dignified pace that allowed the waiting crowd to savor every second of its approach. The vehicle looked impressive and official, its polished surface reflecting the autumn sunlight as it made its way toward the designated stopping point in front of the community center. Mrs. Davies clutched her granddaughter's hand tightly, tears of excitement already forming in her eyes. She had lived through so many years without ever expecting to witness such a moment in her small town. Tommy Evans bounced excitedly in his father's arms. His homemade drawing crumpled in his small fist as he waved frantically at the approaching car. The Range Rover came to a smooth stop exactly where the red carpet had been laid out by the organizing committee. For a brief moment, everything seemed frozen in time. The crowd held its collective breath, cameras focused and ready, as everyone waited for the car doors to open and reveal the royal couple they had traveled so far to see. Security personnel took their final positions, their trained eyes scanning the crowd one last time before giving the all-clear signal. The driver remained seated while a protection officer stepped forward to open the passenger door. This was the moment that would be remembered and talked about in the town for generations to come. Prince William emerged first from the vehicle, and immediately something seemed different from what everyone expected. Those closest to the car noticed that his usual confident stride appeared hesitant, almost uncertain. His famous smile, which had charmed millions around the world, seemed forced and strained around the edges, instead of the relaxed, approachable demeanor he was known for. There was a tension in his shoulders that even casual observers could detect. The crowd continued cheering and waving, but some of the more observant spectators began to sense that something was not quite right. William's usual habit of making immediate eye contact with the crowd and offering genuine waves seemed absent. Instead, he appeared to be looking through the people rather than at them, as if his mind was somewhere else entirely. Kate stepped out of the vehicle next, and the contrast with her usual public appearances was even more striking. Known for her grace under pressure and her natural ability to connect with people, she seemed almost fragile today. Her elegant navy coat was impeccable as always, and her hair was perfectly styled, but there was something in her posture that suggested vulnerability rather than royal confidence. Her hands, usually steady and graceful as she waved to crowds, were visibly trembling as she smoothed down her coat and touched her hair nervously. Those familiar with her public appearances over the years could see that this was not the composed, radiant duchess they had come to admire. Her breathing appeared shallow and controlled, as if she was concentrating hard on maintaining her composure. The couple stood together beside their vehicle for a moment, and the crowd's cheering reached its peak. British flags waved enthusiastically, children called out greetings, and cameras clicked constantly as everyone tried to capture the perfect photograph. But William and Kate seemed almost disconnected from the celebration happening around them, as if they were present physically but mentally somewhere else entirely. William reached for Kate's hand, a gesture that might have seemed romantic to casual observers, but appeared more like a husband offering support to his wife during a difficult moment. The brief squeeze he gave her fingers was gentle but urgent, the kind of touch that communicates understanding and shared strength in the face of adversity. Mayor Jenkins stepped forward with his practiced welcome speech ready, his face beaming with pride and excitement. He had rehearsed this moment countless times, pairing jokes and local references that he hoped would make the royal couple smile and feel welcomed by their community. But as he approached them, he too began to notice that something seemed unusual about their demeanor today. The mayor's welcoming words were warm and genuine, expressing the community's honor at hosting such distinguished visitors. He spoke about the town's history, its proud traditions, and how much this royal visit meant to everyone who had gathered to witness it. But as he spoke, he could see that William and Kate were struggling to maintain their usual engaged expressions. Kate's eyes began to glisten with unshed tears, though she fought valiantly to keep them from falling. Her training in royal protocol and years of public appearances had taught her to maintain composure under any circumstances. But today, that training was being tested in ways she had never experienced before. The local children's choir began singing their carefully rehearsed welcome song, their young voices pure and sweet in the crisp autumn air. Under normal circumstances, this would have been exactly the kind of moment that Kate especially loved. Often kneeling down to chat with children and asking about their schools and interests. Today, however, the innocent joy in their voices seemed to make her emotional state even more fragile. William acknowledged the singing children with a nod and what he hoped passed for a smile. But those who knew him well could see the effort it required. His jaw was clenched tightly, and there was a distant look in his eyes that suggested his thoughts were far from the ceremony taking place around him. The walk from the car to the community center entrance was only 50 meters, but it felt like the longest journey William and Kate had ever taken together. Each step seemed to require enormous effort as they moved through the enthusiastic crowd that lined both sides of the red carpet. The cheering voices and waving flags created a tunnel of celebration around them, but both felt isolated within their own private world of worry and fear. Children reached out with flowers and handmade cards, their innocent faces glowing with excitement at seeing real royalty up close. Under normal circumstances, Kate would have stopped to accept every offering, crouching down to chat with the youngsters and asking about their drawings. William would have made jokes and shared laughs with the adults, remembering names and making personal connections that would be treasured forever. Today was different. They managed polite smiles and brief waves, but their responses felt mechanical and distant. Kate accepted a small bouquet from a 6-year-old girl named Emma, but her hands shook as she took the flowers. William paused to shake hands with a group of local veterans. But those who watched closely could see that his attention was divided, his mind clearly elsewhere. The community center doors opened to reveal the beautifully decorated interior where local dignitaries and special guests waited in respectful lines. Fresh flowers adorned every available surface, and the walls displayed carefully arranged photographs showcasing the town's proud history and community achievements. Everything had been prepared with meticulous attention to detail, creating an atmosphere of warmth and celebration. Mrs. Patel, the florist, had positioned herself near the entrance with her most beautiful arrangement, hoping for a chance to present it personally to Kate. She had spent hours selecting the perfect combination of roses, lilies, and local wildflowers, arranging them in a way that would represent the natural beauty of their Welsh countryside. As Kate approached, Mrs. Patel stepped forward with a nervous smile. Kate accepted the bouquet graciously, but Mrs. Patel immediately noticed something was wrong. The Duchess's hands were cold and trembling, and her eyes seemed unfocused, as if she was looking through rather than at the person in front of her. The usual warmth and genuine interest that Kate showed during such interactions was absent, placed by what seemed like barely controlled emotion. The receiving line moved slowly as William and Kate made their way through the assembled guests. Local council members, business owners, teachers, and community volunteers had all been selected for this honor based on their contributions to the town. Each person had prepared something special to say, a personal story or community achievement they hoped to share with the royal visitors. Mr. Thomas, headmaster of the local primary school, had brought along photographs of recent school achievements. In a letter written by his students, he had planned to invite William and Kate to visit the school during their next trip to Wales. But as he began to speak, he could see that Kate's eyes were filling with tears that she was desperately trying to contain. The school choir, positioned near the memorial plaque that would be unveiled later, began singing a traditional Welsh song that they had been practicing for weeks. Their pure young voices filled the decorated hall with beautiful harmonies that should have created a magical moment for everyone present. Instead, the innocent joy in their singing seemed to make Kate's emotional state even more fragile. William noticed his wife's distress and moved closer to her, offering his arm for support. The gesture was subtle but meaningful, the kind of protective instinct that comes naturally between married couples who have weathered many storms together. Those who observed this quiet moment of connection understood they were witnessing something deeply personal and private. The mayor guided them toward the memorial plaque, covered with a ceremonial cloth and surrounded by wreaths of poppies and local flowers. This was meant to be the centerpiece of their visit, honoring local veterans who had served their country with distinction. The ceremony had been planned as a celebration of courage, sacrifice, and community spirit. As they approached the memorial area, Kate's composure began to crack more visibly. Her breathing became more labored, and she pressed her lips together, tightly fighting to maintain control. Several people in the front rows noticed her distress and began to whisper quietly among themselves. Wondering what could be causing such obvious emotional turmoil, William positioned himself protectively. Beside his wife, his own struggle with emotion becoming more apparent. His jaw was clenched so tightly that the muscles in his face were clearly visible, and his hands, usually steady and confident, showed slight tremors as he prepared to address the assembled crowd. The moment had arrived for the formal speeches and the memorial unveiling. Everything had been prepared perfectly, from the microphone placement to the ceremonial scissors for cutting the ribbon. The crowd waited expectantly, cameras focused and ready to capture this historic moment for posterity. But as William approached the microphone, something in his demeanor suggested that this ceremony was about to take an unexpected turn. The man, who had given countless speeches and handled hundreds of public appearances with natural ease, seemed to be struggling with something far more challenging than royal protocol. Kate stood beside him, her royal training in public appearance and composure being tested in ways she had never imagined. The woman who had charmed the world with her grace and natural warmth was fighting an internal battle that threatened to overwhelm her completely. The assembled crowd waited in respectful silence, sensing that they were about to witness something significant. The atmosphere in the beautifully decorated community center had shifted from celebration to something more profound and emotionally charged. Though no one yet understood why, William stepped up to the microphone, his hands gripping the edges of the wooden podium so tightly that his knuckles turned white. The community center had fallen completely silent, with only the soft sound of camera shutters clicking in the background. Everyone waited expectantly for his prepared remarks about community spirit and the importance of honoring local heroes. He cleared his throat and looked out at the sea of faces before him. These were good people who had taken time from their busy lives to welcome him and Kate to their town. They deserved honesty, not empty words spoken through a mask of royal duty. Children sat cross-legged on the floor in the front, their eyes wide with wonder at seeing a real prince speak. Elderly residents leaned forward in their chairs, eager to hear every word. William opened his mouth to begin his speech, but the words caught in his throat. He'd given hundreds of speeches before, addressed parliaments and world leaders, spoken at state dinners and charity events. But today, the weight of what he needed to say felt overwhelming. The prepared remarks about community resilience and local heritage seemed meaningless in light of what had happened that morning. Kate stood beside him, her composure finally beginning to crumble completely. Now tears that she had been fighting to hold back throughout the morning began to roll down her cheeks. She tried to wipe them away discreetly, but more kept coming. The Duchess, who had maintained perfect poise through years of public scrutiny, was breaking down in front of a room full of strangers. The sight of Kate crying sent a ripple of concern through the assembled crowd. People began to shift uncomfortably in their seats, unsure of what was happening, but clearly sensing that something was very wrong. The Mayor Hoff rose from his chair, wondering if he should intervene somehow. But unsure of the proper protocol for such an unusual situation, William saw his wife's distress and made a decision that went against every rule of royal protocol he had ever learned. Instead of delivering his prepared speech about community achievements and local pride, he chose to speak from his heart about the devastating news they had received just hours before leaving for this visit. His voice was barely above a whisper when he finally began to speak, but in the complete silence of the room, every word carried clearly to the back rows. The microphone picked up the tremor in his voice as he struggled to maintain control. This was not the confident, polished prince the world was used to seeing, but a father facing every parent's worst nightmare. The first words that came out were not the ones anyone expected to hear. Instead of talking about the memorial plaque or the town's history, William spoke about fear, about love, about the fragility of life and how quickly everything you hold dear can be threatened. His voice cracked with emotion as he tried to explain why this visit was so different from any other they had made. Kate stepped closer to the microphone, her hand finding William's arm for support. When she spoke, her voice was so quiet that people in the back rows had to strain to hear her words. The Duchess, who usually spoke with confidence and warmth, now sounded like any mother facing an unimaginable crisis with her child. The revelation that their youngest son, Prince Louis, was facing a serious medical condition hit the room like a physical blow. The silence that followed was profound and complete, the kind of quiet that seems to absorb all sound and movement. Even the children in the front row, who had been fidgeting and whispering moments before, sat perfectly still. Mrs. Davies, who had been waiting since dawn to see the royal couple, felt tears sprang to her eyes as she listened to Kate's broken voice, describing the phone call from doctors that had changed everything. As a grandmother herself, she understood the terror that must be consuming these parents who had to carry on with their public duties while their hearts were breaking. Tommy Evans, still clutching his crumpled drawing of the royal family, looked up at his father with confusion. He was too young to fully understand what was being said, but he could feel the sadness that had settled over the room like a heavy blanket. His father lifted him up and held him close, both of them watching as the fairy tale royal visit transformed into something much more real and heartbreaking. The veterans in their uniforms, men and women who had faced their own battles and understood courage under pressure, sat with tears in their eyes as they watched these young parents struggle to maintain their composure while sharing their deepest fears. They recognized the kind of bravery it took to continue fulfilling duty, even when your personal world was falling apart. William's prepared speech lay, forgotten on the podium, as he spoke instead about the phone call that had shattered their morning. The doctor's words, the fear in Louis's eyes, the terrible uncertainty about what the future might hold for their little boy. These were not the words of a prince addressing his subjects, but of a father speaking to other parents who would understand his pain. Kate's tears flowed freely now, all pretense of royal composure abandoned. She spoke about holding Louis before they left, about promising him they would be back soon, about the guilt of leaving him even though the doctors had assured them he was stable. Her voice broke as she described trying to explain to George and Charlotte why their little brother had to stay in the hospital. The crowd remained absolutely silent, but their silence was not empty. It was filled with compassion, understanding, and shared human experience. These people who had come to celebrate and wave flags were now witnesses to something far more profound than a royal ceremony.
Oh.
They were seeing two people they had admired, from afar revealed as humans facing the same fears that any parent might face. The memorial plaque waited under its ceremonial covering. The speeches remained unread, and the planned celebrations were forgotten. What was happening in this small Welsh community center was more important than any royal protocol. It was a moment of genuine human connection that transcended titles and crowns and touched the hearts of everyone present. As William and Kate stood together at the podium, supporting each other through their shared anguish, the room full of strangers became something like a family. United in their concern for these parents and their sick child, the silence in the community center stretched on for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds. It was the kind of profound quiet that happens when an entire room of people collectively holds its breath, processing something unexpected and deeply moving. The revelation about Prince Louis had transformed the atmosphere from celebration to something much more sacred and intimate. Mrs. Davies was the first person to move. The elderly grandmother slowly stood up from her chair in the third row, her arthritic hands gripping her walking stick for support. Her eyes were filled with tears, but her face showed the kind of determination that comes from a lifetime of facing difficult moments with grace and strength. She had raised 5 children of her own and helped care for 12 grandchildren, so she understood the terror that William and Kate were experiencing. Without saying a word, Mrs. Davies began to walk slowly toward the front of the room. Her granddaughter, Sarah, tried to stop her, worried that approaching the royal couple without permission might be inappropriate, but the older woman gently shook her head. Some moments in life are more important than protocol, and this was clearly one of them, as Mrs. Davies made her way forward. Other people in the crowd began to follow her lead. Mr. Thomas, the headmaster who had raised 4 children and dealt with countless worried parents over the years, stood up next. Then Mrs. Patel, the florist who had lost her own son in a car accident 15 years earlier and understood the fragility of life. One by one, the people in the community center began to rise from their seats. William and Kate watched in amazement as the formal audience transformed into something that looked more like a prayer gathering or a support group meeting. These strangers, who had come simply to see royalty and perhaps get a photograph, were now approaching them as fellow human beings who understood suffering and wanted to offer comfort. The first person to reach them was old Mrs. Davies. She looked directly into Kate's tear-filled eyes and reached into her small handbag, pulling out a worn prayer card that she had carried for decades. The card showed a picture of St. Jude, the patron saint of hopeless causes, and the edges were soft from years of handling during difficult times. Mrs. Davies pressed the prayer card into Kate's trembling hands and spoke in a voice that was quiet but steady. She told Kate that she had carried that card through her husband's battle with cancer, through her daughter's difficult pregnancy, and through countless other moments when prayer was the only thing that helped. She promised that she would pray for little Louis every single day until he was well again. Kate accepted the prayer card and clutched it to her chest, fresh tears streaming down her face. But these were different tears now, tears of gratitude rather than despair. The simple kindness of this stranger's gesture touched something deep in her heart, reminding her that she and William were not alone in their fear and worry. Mr. Thomas approached next, and instead of the formal speech he had prepared about school achievements, he spoke quietly about his own experience when his youngest daughter had been diagnosed with a serious illness. He told William that the hardest part was feeling helpless, but that parents find strength they never knew they had when their children need them. His words were simple but profound, spoken from the heart of someone who had walked this difficult path. Mrs. Patel stepped forward with tears in her eyes, carrying the beautiful flower arrangement she had prepared. Instead of presenting it as a formal gift, she explained that these particular flowers had been chosen for their meaning. The white roses represented hope, the blue delphiniums symbolized protection, and the small sprigs of rosemary were for remembrance and keeping loved ones close to your heart, even when apart. More people continued to approach, each one offering something different but equally meaningful. A young mother named Rachel, who was holding her own toddler, promised to light a candle for Louis in their local church. An elderly veteran named Colonel Morrison, who had faced danger in foreign wars, assured William that courage comes in many forms, and that being a worried parent takes just as much bravery as facing any enemy. The children from the local school choir, who had been sitting quietly in the front row, began to gather around Kate's legs like flowers seeking sunlight. They were too young to fully understand the gravity of the situation, but they could sense that the pretty lady in the nice coat was sad and needed comfort. Tommy Evans, still holding his crumpled drawing, tugged gently on Kate's coat and offered to give his picture to Prince Louis when he got better. The transformation in the room was remarkable. What had begun as a formal royal visit with strict protocols and careful staging had become something organic and deeply human. The barriers between royalty and commoners had dissolved completely, replaced by the universal bonds of parenthood, compassion, and shared humanity. William found himself surrounded by fathers who understood his fear, mothers who recognized Kate's anguish, and grandparents who had lived long enough to know that even the darkest moments can lead to hope. These people offered no empty platitudes or false promises, but instead shared their own stories of struggle and survival. Creating a web of support around the grieving parents, the mayor, who had spent weeks preparing formal remarks and ceremonial procedures, found himself abandoning his official role completely. Instead of worrying about proper protocol, he simply stood with his community as they offered their hearts to two people in pain. The memorial plaque remained covered, the official speeches went undelivered. But something far more important was happening in their place. Camera crews, who had come to film a standard royal visit, found themselves documenting something unprecedented. The journalists present struggled to find words to describe what they were witnessing, because this kind of spontaneous outpouring of human compassion rarely happens in such a public setting. As more and more people approached William and Kate, the formal structure of the event completely disappeared. Royal security, who would normally maintain strict boundaries, stepped back and allowed the crowd to gather close. Even they seemed to understand that this moment was bigger than protocol, more important than security procedures. The community center, decorated with flowers and flags for a celebration, had become something like a sanctuary where two frightened parents found themselves, embraced by an entire town's worth of love and support. As the afternoon began to settle over the small Welsh town, the community center had become something entirely different from what anyone had planned. The formal royal visit had transformed into an extraordinary moment of human connection that none of the people present would ever forget. William and Kate stood surrounded by a circle of caring strangers, who would become something like family in the space of a few hours. The memorial ceremony that was supposed to be the centerpiece of their visit finally took place, but in a way that was far more meaningful than any planned event could have been. William approached the covered plaque with steady hands now, his composure restored by the outpouring of support from the community. When he pulled away the ceremonial cloth, he spoke not just about the veterans being honored, but about all kinds of courage, including the bravery it takes to face uncertainty and fear. His words about the local heroes who had served their country took on new meaning in light of what had happened that day. He talked about how courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to keep going despite being afraid. The veterans in their uniforms nodded in understanding, recognizing in this young father the same kind of determination they had shown in their own battles. Kate stepped forward to lay the ceremonial wreath, and as she did, dozens of other people came forward with their own flowers. Mrs. Patel's arrangement was joined by simple daisies picked from garden borders, roses from someone's backyard, and even dandelions offered by children who thought they were just as beautiful as any formal bouquet. The memorial became covered in a wild mixture of flowers that somehow looked more beautiful than any professional arrangement. The children's choir, who had been silent witnesses to the emotional transformation of the day, began to sing again. But this time their song was different. Instead of the formal Welsh anthem they had practiced, they sang a simple hymn about hope and healing that everyone in the room could join. Voices both young and old blended together in harmony, creating music that filled the decorated space. With something magical and healing, Tommy Evans, who had been clutching his drawing all day, finally found the courage to approach Kate directly. He tugged on her coat and offered his picture, explaining in a small voice that he had drawn Prince Louis with a big smile because he wanted him to be happy. Kate knelt down to accept the gift, and for the first time that day, her smile was genuine and warm. She promised Tommy that she would give the drawing to Louis as soon as she got home. The mayor, who had abandoned his prepared speeches hours earlier, found himself speaking from the heart about what the community had witnessed that day. He talked about how the royal visit had taught them all something important about compassion, about breaking down barriers between people, and about how sharing our deepest fears can sometimes lead to finding unexpected strength and support. As the formal part of the ceremony concluded, people began to approach William and Kate with practical offers of help. Mrs. Davies invited them to call her anytime they needed someone to talk to who understood what they were going through. Mr. Thomas offered the resources of the school if the royal children needed any educational support during this difficult time. Colonel Morrison, the veteran, pressed a small medal into William's hand, telling him it had brought him luck through many dangerous situations. The local priest, Father O'Brien, who had been quietly observing from the back of the room, came forward to offer his own support. He spoke gently about the power of prayer and community, and how sometimes the most unexpected places can become sources of strength and healing. He offered to include Prince Louis in the prayers of the entire parish and to light a special candle that would burn until the little boy was completely well. Kate found herself surrounded by mothers who shared their own stories of sleepless nights spent worrying about their children, of hospital waiting rooms and doctor appointments that changed everything. These women offered practical advice about staying strong during medical treatments, about finding hope in small improvements, and about taking care of themselves so they could be strong for their child. The teenagers from the local secondary school, who had been watching the adult emotions with wide eyes, approached with their own offering. They had quickly organized themselves and created a large card signed by everyone in their class, promising to think good thoughts for Prince Louis and sending him their best wishes for a quick recovery. Their simple gesture touched William and Kate deeply, reminding them that kindness comes naturally to young people when they see others in need. As the time came for William and Kate to leave, the goodbye was unlike any royal departure at anyone had ever witnessed. Instead of formal handshakes and polite applause, there were genuine hugs, whispered words of encouragement, promises to stay in touch. Phone numbers were exchanged, email addresses shared, real friendships formed in a way It would have been impossible under normal circumstances. The crowd that gathered outside to watch them leave was different from the one that had greeted them that morning. The excitement was still there, but it was mixed with something deeper and more meaningful. These people were no longer just spectators watching royalty pass by. They had become part of William and Kate's story, connected to their family in a way that transcended titles and traditions. As the black Range Rover pulled away from the community center, William and Kate waved from the windows with genuine warmth and gratitude. The prayer card from Mrs. Davies was tucked safely in Kate's purse, along with Tommy's drawing and dozens of other small gifts that meant more than any formal present ever could. They were returning to their sick child armed with the prayers, love, and support of an entire community. The people of Llanfairpwll stood watching until the royal convoy disappeared around the corner, then slowly began to make their way home. But they carried with them the knowledge that they had been part of something extraordinary. A moment when artificial barriers had fallen away and human hearts had connected in the most authentic way possible. The memorial plaque would remain as a lasting tribute to local heroes, but the real memorial to that day would live in the hearts and memories of everyone who witnessed. How compassion can transform even the most formal occasions into something beautiful and healing. The royal visit that began in planned celebration had ended in genuine love, creating bonds that would last far beyond that single afternoon in Wales.